Hi, this is David Beattie, founder of Slot Mods Raceways on Cars and Culture with Jason Stein.
He could be the most popular man globally this month, at least in the minds of a million children around the world, or perhaps not even the children, but the adults who want to be children. David, slot car track king, welcome to Cars and Culture. Thank you for taking some time away from what must be extremely busy days for you as the holidays approach.
Yes, they are, Jason, and thanks for having me on the show. I think people enjoy the stories of what me and my elves have to bring.
Exactly.
We keep pretty busy at this time of year.
David, Auto Week once wrote that you're the hippest toy maker this side of the big guy in the red suit himself. The hippest toy maker. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is. When I read that, it kind of took me by surprise. Tongue in cheek, it's a great lead into the story. I'm proud to be the hippest guy next to Santa.
So let's talk about slot car tracks. Not the kind you found under your tree when you were a kid. You know, if you want Mazda Raceway Laguna Seca for your basement, or Le Mans, or a slice of Monaco, or the track car of your dreams, that's what you create. Tell me how you got into this crazy world.
Well, it all started out back in like 2004. I had a Hammacher Schlemmer catalog, and it had a slot car race track in it. And I told my wife that's what I wanted for Christmas, and she kind of rolled her eyes. And so I was like, okay. So Christmas morning came, and I opened all my gifts, and there was no slot car track. And she likes to tease me. So down the hall, she came with a small slot car track, and I was the happiest boy, like getting a Red Rocket BB gun or something.
She gave you one, right?
Yeah,
a 1/48 scale, right?
Yes, sir. And so I set it up in the basement, and I started racing around on it. And it just wasn't enough for me. So kind of fast forward, I went into a bigger 1/32 scale, and then that was plastic. And then I built a big wooden track in my basement. And then I was totally hooked, and I was slot car racing, as a hobby while I was still working. And I was working for an exhibit house. And some people think I was an engineer at Ford, but that's a different story. But the way I really got into it was I had a real passion for it, and I was doing it as a hobby at home. And then when in 2008, when the economy crashed and I found myself out of a job, I thought to myself, hey, you know what? I really enjoy slot car racing, and I think there's other guys out there that would dig this too. So I put a little money aside. My wife said, hey, I'm behind you 100%. If you believe in it, I believe in it. And so kind of went off at a slow start, but a gentleman at a hobby shop let me set up in his aisle 6. And I made these little 4x8 tracks, 4x16, and $700, do it yourself. And so I'd go there with my daughter, and she'd be at the end of the table, and people would come in, and they would look at it. They were excited to see it. And some of my older friends would come in who I'd worked with in the past, and they looked at me like, what happened, Dave?
What are you doing here?
Yeah, exactly. So out of those tracks, I was able to sell one. And I was like,
one.
Just one. So I had some business cards printed, and I was leaving them up at Pasteiner's. I know Eric and the boys up there.
This is in Michigan.
Yes, sir. And maybe Jason, I'll stop calling you sir. But
please, it's the holidays. Please.
Yes. So there's quite a few different tentacles to the story. But what really kind of got it started was a gentleman I was advertising on a local website for slot car enthusiasts and such. And a gentleman reached out to me and said, hey, can you build me a slot car track? And I said, yeah, sure. So he wanted to come to my house to see my track. And that's what, my track was 20 by 20, 170 feet long, 6 lanes. And he walked in and he goes, oh my God, how much for something like this? And I had no idea, because that wasn't what I was looking to do. I was trying to get that $700. And so he said, well, what about like a third of this? And just off the cuff, I said, $4,000. And he said, I'll take it. And also I was like, holy shit, this guy's willing to pay me $4,000. I mean, I was so happy, it's like the biggest thing in my life, leaning against the wash machine while it's running, and he left. And I tell my wife, hey, this guy's gonna pay me $4,000. So, I ended up out in his garage, 5-car garage, a nice home. He had a nice little collection. And that's when I thought it hit me as like, okay, This is my clientele, the demographic for the guys who have the car collections, the garage, and had a passion for slot car racing, and are kind of reaching back into the youth. And I sometimes I refer to myself as we make time machines, because these tracks take you back to when you were young and racing on the floor, and trying to get through the turn as fast as you can. And we were kind of like animals when we grew up. At seven brothers, and we put lighter fluid under the tires in the living room, and spinning them, and just crazy stuff like that. But
Who
so
was that gentleman?
his name was Larry Crescenza, and he was just a local guy looking for a track. But about 2 weeks later, I got an email from a gentleman and said, "Hey, I'm interested in a slot car track. I'd like to do Laguna Seca. Please give me a call." Jim Farley.
The famous Laguna Seca, and the
Yes.
famous Jim Farley, now the CEO at Ford Motor Company.
Yes.
And you didn't know Jim.
I didn't know Jim, but after I hung up, I usually Google people, and all of a sudden I found him. His name was all over the place. He was the golden boy out at Toyota, Lexus, or whatever he had turned around out there before he came to Ford. I may have that off, but so I'm like, oh no, so back then, he was like going to be potentially my biggest client. And I reached out to him, and he was the coolest dude. And he's like, "Hey, Dave, I like Laguna Seca. Can you do this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." He goes, "Well, how much?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'll have to come out and see your space." So I went out to Jim's, and there's kind of a side note to it. I had a little Volkswagen, my wife's Rabbit, and I drove it out there and pulled up, and he had, his Mustang and stuff all around. And Jim looked around my head and kind of looked, and he went, "Oh, nice car." And I'm like, "Yeah, thanks." So I should have drove a Ford product. But as it turned out, I ended up building a track for Jim, and he's been really a great champion of slot mods. And I tell some of my friends and that, I'm like, back then, before 20 years ago, or when I was a kid, I could have never imagined that the president of Ford Motor Company would be giving me his friends and family.
Well,
numbers.
especially, I mean, you grew up in the Michigan area. You were a Ford engineer for a while, right?
No. I never worked at Ford. I was in the exhibit industry, and that kind of came up somewhere, and I really don't know. But the exhibit house I worked for, we did do work for Ford, but I never worked directly with them.
So let me ask you, as a kid, and you're one of 11 children, correct?
Yes.
So appropriate that you would be in the toy business as one of 11 kids. Were you much of a slot car guy growing up?
My brothers were more so than I. I'm the youngest of 11. So my older brothers, they had slot car tracks. And the way our house was, you could run them all the way around. It kind of went in an H or whatever, I don't know, or whatever. And so, I had more like slot car snowmobiles, just these little things that my mother would get us that were kind of offbeat. But then I started racing the slot cars, and we'd set it up when the Indianapolis 500 was on, and just kind of associated with racing. Well, my older brother Leo, he went on to work for McLaren Racing out in Southfield. So then that really got us into like the racing scene and such, and being exposed to Can-Am racing. He'd bring home the trailer on their way back from Road America, and Peter Refson's cars on the back. And, we were more interested in riding, the pit bikes. But yeah, and one of the stories is we had a bunch of the tires in our garage, and we used to roll them around and play with them, and they were pretty much all right down to the cords and that. And one day my dad said, "Oh, get rid of that junk, put it out to the street." And I can remember rolling the tires out there. And now I wish I could have them sitting in the corner of my office.
Yeah, right.
So, but so the slot car racing, we were, big families in the neighborhood, so we'd be racing at other people's houses and in our house as well.
So slot mods tracks, now for the uninformed, they range in size from 32 square feet to 420 square feet, $20,000 to $250,000 or more. And on average, a track takes 8 months to build and runs between $150,000 and $175,000. So you go from this one track that you built, you're trying to sell for $700, to all of this. I know that the momentum, I mean, it's a crazy story, but the momentum comes out of a couple of those first sales. When did you realize that you had the kind of scale to really build this up, or even the clientele that you could go ahead and take this?
Well, when it was kind of I really, let's see how I can put this into perspective. It really kind of came to fruition when I went out to Pebble Beach and I took a track out there. And what had happened is Jim had commissioned me, Farley, to build his track. So I was building this one track. And in the meantime, Pebble Beach reached out to me, and they had seen a story on me in Garage Style magazine. And they said, "Hey, we'd love you to build a Pebble Beach Raceway, and we would auction off at Gooding Auction." And I said, yeah, okay, I'll be there. So I hung up the phone and I'm like, well, I don't have any money, except for the dollars that Jim was putting through. So I borrowed $10,000 from a friend and said, I want to build this. I just want to get out to Pebble Beach, and then I'll pay you back when I get there. So when I went out there, all I wanted was $10,000. Well, the track at Gooding Auction sold for $27,000, and that was like, bing. And then while I had the track on display, Jay Leno had come through and he did a story, and I ended up being on Jay Leno's Garage twice before he went off of NBC. And then from there, I became Gift of the Season with Rob Report, and a couple other magazines started picking up on me. And that's when things started to scale up with employees and also the price of the tracks.
And then the customers came.
Yes.
You started running some ads in Auto Week magazine, some other magazines. Now, all of a sudden, you had some really big clientele knocking on your door. Tell me about that development as well.
That development, and I got to say thank you to Casey Crane and Dutch and the boys, because they were really good to me, and Gene Jennings at Automobile, because, to get to these clientele, before everything really happened, I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote to all these magazines, like, "To whom am I concerned? My name is David Beattie, and I build slot car tracks." And so just out of that, Auto Week and Automobile sent out people, and they did a story. From that story, I got this email from a gentleman, Zach Brown, who a lot of you might know, and
McLaren team principal. He's been on this show.
Yeah, great guy. And he just wrote and said, "Hey, I want you to build me Le Mans," and he listed because the tracks that he liked, and I'm like, okay, who's Zach Brown? So I went and Googled Zach, and
that guy.
Yeah, because this was kind of a new world to me, this level of clients. And so him and I went back and forth on some emails, and he likes to get things done fast. And he said, "When can you come down?" And I said, "Well, my brother-in-law's got a plane. We'll fly down, a little two-seater." And I said, "We'll come down in 2 weeks." Unfortunately, Michigan weather, there was a snowstorm. So I called Zach and said, "Hey, I sent him an email, said, hey, I can't make it down tomorrow due to the snow." He wrote back, "Okay, I'll send my jet." And I didn't respond. I said to my wife, "Yeah, this guy's going to send a jet," And so next day, his assistant says, "Be at Pentastar in Oakland." And my colleague, one of my craftsmen and I went out there, and sure enough, there was the jet, and flew down to Zach's and spent about an hour and a half with them.
Indianapolis.
Yes, sir. And he's like, "Can you fit a track in this room?" That was like his beautiful house, in this one room that's unfinished. And so we had to like shoehorn this track to get everything he wanted. So we ended up building him a 25 by 14 foot track, and delivered it. He was really happy. And as the doors to this clientele started to open, he had a Super Bowl party. And I said, "Well, why don't I come down and I'll manage the track for you, so your guests, you can just have fun." Well, we went down there, and one of those guests included Bobby Rahal, and which was a treat to me. And Bobby walked in and he saw the track, and he was like, "Oh my God, I got to go eat before I buy one of these." And I just said, "Well, eat light." And so he left the room, and then quite a few guys were racing, and then Bobby came back. And what was really interesting is that he is competitive at everything, at any level. And he and I were going head to head, racing, and the cars were flipping off, and he had the biggest smile on his face. And so he said, "Pleased to meet you, David. Take care. This is great." And he left. So after, the Zach experience was done and he was very happy, we were driving back, two of us. And right at that point, I realized I don't have any more tracks in the queue, because I had there was less interest. And, with the tracks I had, going on in the shop and finishing up, but there was really no more money rolling in. And we're about 1 hour into the drive home and the phone rings and it's, "Hey, Dave, this is Bobby. I want a track. Can you be in Chicago tomorrow?" And I'm like, yeah, hell yes. So I drove out to Chicago, and on that same time, 20 minutes later, Jerry Forsyth with Indeck Racing, he was part of the IndyCart. He had called and said, "Hey, Dave, I've got this Auto Week ad that I've been saving while I was building my house, and now it's time. I'm ready." And he wanted Road America just like Bobby did. So I went from being no cash flow to $250,000 in sales in a 20-minute ride from being no money at all.
Wow.
So it was, and it wasn't like, it was a little overwhelming. It was exciting. Still had to do the work. Still had to figure out how to do the work because my skills, if I had to build a table to save my life for them to operate on, it would collapse. So I had to really find some good craftsmen and surround myself with people because I have the vision and I know what I want to see. And so in finding these other artists and me saying, this is what I see, this is what I want to do. And then I also, do the carving and the painting and such, but it was really more of surrounding myself with a good team.
Well, and Bobby didn't just want Road America in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. He wanted Road America that he knew from his youth. He wanted it to look like the old pagoda, the old pits, the guardrails, the bridges, the barn that used to be in turn 14, and the topography very much like Elkhart Lake. All that stuff from the 60s. How do you do that kind of research to be able to create something like that?
Well, that era of racing is my favorite era, and I really like building late 60s, early 70s. So, but when I went to Bobby's, he had like boxes of old programs and such, and he said, "Here, David, take these and look through them, just bring them back." So we were able to look through there, and see the barn and the pagoda, and it was such a treat to build those old buildings and then see them come to life. Now, and Bobby, like you say, he did want it to represent what he raced on back in that day. And so normally in my tracks, you have the front straight as the lowest part, and then the track climbs up as it goes back. So you can see everything as it's winding up. Well, Road America starts high in the front and goes down in the back. And I go, "Well, that's not how I build it." He goes, "Well, that's the way it is." So we built it, 22 feet by 14 feet deep. I think the best replica that I could do at the time of Road America. And it's a great track and he loves it.
You've had so many other famous people. I mean, one thing just led to another. All of a sudden now you were building tracks for former IndyCar driver Adrian Fernandez. And you were doing a replica slot track of the Indianapolis 500 for former owner Tony George. I mean, the momentum behind this is just incredible. And even Formula One. Tell me what Formula One did, or what you did for Formula One.
Well, Formula One reached out to me, I think it was in 2018, which was great because I got this email from Sean Bratches and just said, "Hey, sure. Zach says you're the slot car guy and we're looking for a track to tour the circuit this year. What can you do for us?" And I said, "Whatever you want." So I talked with Sean and the management company, and the thing about that track was, being that it was going to go to every race that year, it couldn't really represent any specific track. So I just designed a very competitive, stylistic track that had some call outs to the main sponsors that year, Heineken, Pirelli and such. So we developed this track. We did integrated cameras that would show the cars going around on these big screens. So we launched it up in Montreal, and I got to race slot cars with Damon Hill, Ross Braun, so it was a great experience. And from there, I mean, so many things happened, Jason, that I kind of lose track. Like I pinball around, like from doing Formula One to Samsung to Audi to Toyota to Ford Motor Company. Shortly after I built Jim's, a gentleman reached out to me and said, "Hey, we'd like you to build a slot car show for the LA Auto Show. Jim Farley says you're the best slot car track maker in the world." Now I'm loving Jim Farley.
Wow. No kidding.
Yeah. And so we did that, and there was just so many things that led and opened doors, and there are the slow times, but I feel very fortunate that I've had these opportunities, and and it is a lot about networking, and it's not what you can get from people, but it's about like what you can give them, and in return they see what we deliver, and they're always like blown away, and they always see, oh, it's more than I could have ever expected. And that's where we kind of have a tagline, racing beyond expectations. And when we do these reveals, these guys, one guy dropped 7 F-bombs, and just like he couldn't get over it. And it is really different to see them because they're just so big. And it's like, when you're rolling a little car on the ground when you're a kid, next thing you know, you're older and you can own that Ferrari that you were playing with, now full size. And when it comes to cars, I did a full-size 917 that you pushed a button, it clamshell open, and there was a little Le Mans in there. And so, what we do offers some opportunities to be very original.
And you give those executives who have made it to the point where they can buy the real Ferrari, you give them something that they can't buy anywhere else. And that's probably that exclusivity that really makes your business shine, I'm guessing.
Yes, I believe so, because I'm not going to say they have everything, but what they, a perfect example is a gentleman I built a track for early on, and he's a private man, but he races in the Ferrari, the Gentleman Series, the GT Cup. And, he said, David, it was about 3 months later, he goes, David, what I love about the track, he says, my friends can come over. They do not have the car collection like I have, and we can look at the cars and talk about them. But when we get over to the track, we become equal, and everyone's competitive, and everyone's slapping backs and racing and laughing and crashing. And he said, it really brings us together at a different level. And he goes, and that's what I really enjoy. And when I delivered this gentleman's track, this guy busted my chops for like a year because he's like, I'm very particular. I race and da, 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 da. And great guy. We install the track. He comes down and sees it. Before I leave, he goes, can I give you a hug? And I said, I'm like, sure. And he says, this is beautiful. It's, what do I owe you? And I told him what it was. And he put a very generous tip on top of what he owed me. And I just, it really kind of blew me away. And I really just felt like, blessed in a way. And there's quite a few stories of just, delivering these things and the guys being surprised, like Zach. I talked to Zach, hey, I'm building the track for this guy. Yeah, but mine's still the best, right? Yes, Zach, it is. So, and he does have a very unique track. And what we do is we don't make duplicates. We make everyone special to them. So it's a unique experience for them, and it's a one of a kind interactive work of art.
You've also had some interesting clients, Progressive Insurance, Neiman Marcus. What did you do for Neiman Marcus?
Neiman Marcus reached out to me. They were looking for gifts of the year, and they said, hey, we love what you're doing. We'd like to do these over the top gifts. And so what I proposed to them that was I would build them a 12 by 30 slot car raceway experience based on Monaco and Le Mans and a few others. And I said, included in that price, I'll bring 3 veteran race car drivers to come over, like David Hobbs, Brian Redman, and these gentlemen, all these racers that I've met over the past 12 years that I never could imagine, the Unsers and all those kinds of people. And so I built them a small version of the track so I could take it down and put it in the store window of Neiman Marcus down in Dallas, which was really a cool experience to see, my track in their window and people walking by, and it's, Christmas time. And so we put the track there, and then they say, look, the Today Show wants you to be on there, want your track on there. They want to feature it with these other gifts. And I'm like, well, yeah. And they're like, well, can you get it there? And I'm like, you want me to pay for it to get it there? And they're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I guess I can do that. Because it was just such an opportunity. So they shipped it up, and it was featured on the Today Show. And, the funny thing is, Al Roker, we're racing slot cars. And I have to tell you, I've heard I used to race cars with my dad at the end of the street. There was a slot car track, and he goes, do you remember those? And I'm like, and I go, oh yeah. And so there's actually a picture of him showing me on his phone where he used to go race slot cars. And, the thing is, I'm kind of glazed over and you can actually see that I'm staring off. I forgot what her name, what are the
You're on the
hosts?
set of the Today Show. I mean,
Yeah.
it's huge.
Yeah, it was. And my daughter and my wife were there. So it was very special. And, they featured the track and these things are, like, again, things I couldn't have dreamt, that there would be. And then by that exposure, the phone rings, the emails come, and it's just some very interesting, people, opportunities, going to talk to the Chowder Club in Manhattan and meeting Skip Barber and sitting at his table on a Christmas party, and just, you know, just really good stuff.
Jay Leno's Garage, you mentioned Discovery Channel, Secret Lives of the Super Rich. You've been on the BBC. It's the kind of exposure that, as you said earlier, you could not have imagined ever occurring before. But I want to talk about one very unique project, and that's the diorama of the Fiat test track on top of the Fiat building in Torino, in Italy, with Fiat 500s that you've made from a mold. That's got to be one of the most unique projects. Tell me a little bit about that. How did that come to be?
There's a gentleman down in El Paso who, Dr. Roberto Asal, and he owns the Globo Rojo Museum. And he had commissioned me to make a Monza spa. He's a big Ferrari collector. And so we built this installation, and he was blown away. And so as I was walking through, he has all these Fiats, and I said, "Wow, these are beautiful." And I got back home, and I was thinking about Fiat, and I was familiar with the building, the Fiat building with the test track on the roof. And I called him, and I was all excited, and I listed out this thing about, I can build you the Fiat track with the production line and custom, 3D printed Fiats. They'll run, and the engineering center, the foundry, and I got really hyped up. And I think it was because my sugar was off. And he's like, "I want it." And then I hung up the phone, and I'm like, "Oh shit, I got to build it." So it was, yeah, exactly. And now what moment? Pardon my swearing, but it was like, oh no, but it was the design process and then the research that we had to do, because just the history. So right now I'm sitting 10 feet, 20 feet away from it. It's in the studio, and it's coming to fruition. And it really is a nice representation of the Fiat factory. It also is like a historical piece, because it's going to tell you, when you look at it, what it is, what these departments are, kind of the history, more of a museum piece. But at the same time, you can go up, walk up, catwalk on the side, and see little Fiat 500Ss circling around on the roof as they would back in the day.
What will you do with it?
It's just for display purposes. It'll be flanked by all his Fiats in his museum. And it's just, you walk up, and we have it that as you walk up, a sensor turns on and the whole building lights up, and then the cars start going around.
Oh my goodness.
And so,
wow.
Yeah.
You have some other special, somewhat secretive projects in the works. Tell us as much as you can about those, because I think this takes your business to a whole other level. If you can just drop in some pearls of what might be coming, David.
Well, the opportunity has presented itself to work with one of the largest toy manufacturers, makers in the world. And many of us played with their toys as kids. And they approached me over a year ago. And when they did, I just thought, nothing's going to come of this. And as we work things out, I ended up signing a contract about 2 weeks ago. So it's a long-term relationship. It's going to change the trajectory of the company, and I'll be able to share who that is, later in 2023. But it's kind of a mind blower into what it is, and they're just fabulous tracks, and they're going to be one of a kind. And when people see them before we can announce, they're going to say, "Okay, I know who built that track." So I'm just really feeling really fortunate. And we have another project in the works with one of the winningest Formula One drivers in the world. And so that well, there's quite a few, some are retired and so, but so just very exciting high level projects that are keeping us sharp. and because we really have to deliver. And I really like to be pushed because I do get bored easily. And so that's where these projects like the Lingato factory, the Porsche 917, the Penske Camaro that we did with the track integrated in the top. In saying so, Jason, in 2022, we are kind of changing the name of the company to Slot Mod Studios Detroit, because not only are we doing the raceways, but we are doing these exhibits, these dioramas, and displays that are all automotive related and make for a really nice fit into a man cave, auto car collection, or museum.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how do you transition to the next phase of what you do? I guess you're answering that for me. But it also comes from technology too, right? That sheer detail of the process and the lengthy consultation meetings, design sketches, 3D realizations, all that you do. And then the really cool part where the technology also includes integrated cameras in the track and race screens and iPad controllers. I mean, this is not slot car racing that I knew.
No, it's a little bit different. I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, all my tracks are analog, and I like it because it stays pure to the original analog that we raced in the 60s and 70s. And it makes it very easier for my clients who are very busy. When they come home and they want to race, they just plug and play versus a digital experience. And we're always looking to improve that with the iPads, with using lap counting systems that make noises when the cars go by. With the integrated cameras, those are, we've done a few of those tracks where one gentleman, we did it was like a 3x5 Ferrari factory with a 52-inch television centered in it. And then as the cars raced around the Nürburgring and such in the corners, you would see the cars on the TV. And it was really a great experience. But yeah, the technology, it's there. We try not to make it too difficult, but simple is best. But we're just trying to keep up with it and see how it works for our product.
What's the most creative thing that you've done? You said each track has to be special, and obviously you meet with clients several times to get a feel for them personally, what features that they want, the famous corners, iconic buildings. They trust you. But what's the most interesting track that you've put together?
That's an interesting question because they all have their certain parts that are interesting. Doing a 16-foot Le Mans pit building with all the spectators in each garage, and I think the one that really stood out is the one that we did. It was 14 by 30 feet long. The front half was Le Mans, the back half was the Nürburgring. It was the one with the integrated cameras, but we had working pits where you could go in, and there's 16 pit stalls, and we recreated the scene from Le Mans in 1970. We had miniature Steve McQueen, so there was all these elements that really dug deep into what the era was there, and that was really interesting one. Doing the 917, that was like from a ground up build. I found a shell from a replica company. We did a rolling chassis, and Hammacher Schlemmer had reached out to me. And here's the full circle. I got a Hammacher Schlemmer catalog when I started out 11 years earlier.
This is where the story starts, right? It
Yeah,
was the one that your wife had given you, the 1/48 scale.
correct.
And now,
And they reached out to me and said, "What can you do for us that is special and over the top?" And I thought, because a lot of this comes into me when I'm dreaming, and I said, well, I could probably do like a 917 car that opens up, and inside there's a little Le Mans raceway. And I kind of consulted with some people, and they said, okay, let's do it. We'll put you on the cover of Hammacher Schlemmer. And I was like, awesome.
wow, it's like being on the cover of Time magazine for you.
Yeah. And that's another one of those, okay, how am I going to build this? I sold the concept, and I guess I like a challenge, but that ended up getting sold before it even hit the catalog, and which was really great. I was trying to get it out to Pebble Beach, but we were just too busy making it. But that was featured on the Discovery Channel as a gift, and it's just a really unique raceway. And it's and I only wanted to build one because these projects are drain emotionally the hell out of me, because you got to think through everything because you want to make each thing different. And when I did the big track for the guy up in Canada, it ended up being, I'm sorry, in Lake Placid. He ordered 3 tracks as part of one, and by the time I was done, I was so exhausted that I was like, trying to tell the Beatles to do the White Album again, but change it up a little bit. And I just told him, look, I'm done for a while, and he's commissioned other things from me since then. But and I think that plays to my team and our characters, that we like to give really original and deep. We're artists here. We're not just making slot car tracks and here, let's just keep getting them out. And it's not about the money. I've done plenty of tracks where there's a guy who has the passion, but he doesn't have the money, and he's got a story, and I hear that story and I say, I can relate to you because I was you at one time and I was looking for a track. And I've done tracks for guys who are on hard times, and they're little tracks, but it brings them joy. And that fills my bucket. Yeah, the big tracks do too, but I've donated 30 out of the box tracks to the VA hospitals and stuff like that. So it's about giving back. I think it's, doing as much as I can.
When David, you've given back to an industry that laid a lot of people off because of the auto show world downsizing. These are the exhibit houses that had the craftsmen, the modelers, right? You've pulled a lot of those folks into your own house in order to make their lives and their careers sustainable now.
Yes. Unfortunately, the turn happened there in the exhibit houses, but there was a pool of talent that I had met in that world. And now I have some of those gentlemen on my team who have taken me to the next level. I mean, just the design, their backgrounds, their hands-on ability. Not only are they, engineers and designers, but model makers. And so when we get into a meeting, now what I call slot mods to me is what I like to refer to as the Island of Misfits. Okay. Because everyone's like these really creative types. And I think you know what I'm talking about. Camilo Pardo,
Yes.
Okay, so talking with Camilo, sometimes you got to grab and say, hey, listen, I'm talking to you. And he'll appreciate me saying that. But so my guys are all unique in their own way. And I don't mean misfits in a bad way. But everyone has
you're talking about toys. So, the Island of Misfits Misfits
exactly.
Toys there, right?
Exactly. And, sometimes people say, well, how did you start this place? And I'm like, well, I never really fit in wherever I worked. I said, they always smoked me out. I was a good interviewer, once I got a couple months in, I got bored. And so I thought I'd create my own world, and now I have it, 6,000 square foot facility. I've got 7 employees. I got 5 freelancers, all very talented artists, and many people, right? I want to come work for you, but it is a job. But when we get done with a track, we race it and it's a great experience. And then we move on to the next. And, right now I am commissioned for tracks that I can't start until a year from now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. How long is the backup? So it's at least 12 months. You get an order that's placed with a unique individual who says, your phone rings and it's somebody says, I want you to see my basement. I'm sending my private jet. And you tell them it'll be a year. That can't sit well.
Well, so correct. But what has kind of happened is I have lost some sales to those, types that say I'm ready. But what I get contacted and they'll say, hey, I'm building a car barn or I'm building a space. It's going to be ready in about 13 months. And, how long is it going to take for you to build a track? And I'll say, well, depending on size, 7 to 8, 8 to 12. And they go, well, that's perfect. And plus I have the ability to store it. So far it has worked better for me because they're not ready. But they also, I think it's the culture in the car world, custom cars, that gentlemen, when they put their cars into a shop to have, if Jim's having his Mustang redone, he might wait, Farley, a year and a half to have it come out right. So they're busy, they're patient. And then when it comes, the track is ready and it's a great experience and their building's ready.
Has COVID impacted your business, supply chain, logistics issues?
A little bit. The braid that we use to run the cars, wood has gone up, I think about 7 to 10%. the quality of the wood we were getting was very poor. So we were trying to create our own little drying system to suck a little bit more of the moisture out of it. But COVID, when it hit, I had a gentleman who was from Detroit, actually grew up in Corktown, which was phenomenal. I mean, it's really cool. And he said, David,
Location of the old Tiger Stadium, actually.
yes. And he said, David, I'm not going to cancel my order. I'm going to let you build and, keep you afloat during COVID, because the corporate jobs, the exhibit jobs, those stopped. There was like 3 in the works and they just ended. So with Bill's track, he said, I want this track, but I also wanted to have my childhood home, the Marathon gas station I worked at in Livonia, my grandmother's house. So we built all these things on the racetrack, and but he also loved Le Mans, so that was in there. So it kind of snaked to his old neighborhood. We made the street look like Corktown and things like that. But the interesting thing is, and some people will appreciate this, is the state was shut down, and my brother was here working for me up from Texas, and I'm like, we got to keep working. And so I had this Challenger RT tuned out as fast as I could, and so to and from work, there was no one on the road. And I felt like Mad Max. And I was just like, grinding it to and from home in a ghost town, So, but as COVID, came to its end, people started having a lot of time on their hands, and they were saying, hey, can you build me a track? And after, I would say about 6 months ago, it just really exploded with interest and being commissioned for more builds.
You've met so many interesting people. You've these connections that you mentioned earlier that you never thought that you would have. Have you gone back to the childhood friend you borrowed the $10,000 from and just said thank you? I'm sure you have.
Yes, I have. And and the interesting thing was, he was like, oh, well, it really wasn't a big deal. And I'm like, yes, it was. And because he allowed me to rent a space eventually, 15 by 25 feet, and I'd make him one track. And then when I got Zach's track, I had to rent more space from him. But he was very generous, and he helped me out through the beginning years when things were getting kind of slow and waiting for a progress payment. And I think a lot of people, including myself, to have that support or that friend is very helpful. And it was a very important cornerstone of what Slot Mods is today.
He is the Lennon and the McCartney doing the next White Album in the slot car track world. David,
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on Cars and Culture. One final thing. If all anyone wants for Christmas is a slot car track, place your order now, right? For 2023?
Yes, sir. Very good. Well, Jason, thanks for having me on. So many stories to tell and so many people to thank that are out there. And the good thing is I do get to see them throughout the year at the shows and such. So it is a really unique and small community. And with Dutch Mandel, you got a great guy on your team, and I smile every time I talk to him. So continued success with your show, and I'm proud to be on it.
A lot of people smiling based on your story here too, David. Thank you so much for being on Cars and Culture.
Thank you.
The automobile is one of the most important inventions that revolutionized the modern world. In America, the rich history of car culture runs deep as technology continues to shape the future of the industry. Jason Stein,
former publisher of Automotive News,
is here to share the stories of people passionate about cars, from industry leaders and innovators to car-obsessed celebrities. Buckle up as Jason takes you inside the boardroom, onto the track, and around the bend on Cars and Culture on Sirius XM Business Radio.